So it's interesting, you're talking about why people have done bad things in the name of morality, but how do we get morality then without religion? How do we, using science, and this is what you've written a lot about, how do we use science to get some sense of morality so we don't end up doing the same things that the religious people are doing?
Right. Well, it starts with the idea, the recognition that moral values are part of our human nature. We have a sense of right and wrong and justice, and it's built into us. And you can see it in all humans and actually all primates. Even other mammals like elephants and dogs and so on, they have a sense of guilt and shame and things like that. And they have a certain amount of empathy, sympathy, cooperativeness, as well as selfishness and greediness and so on. They have these suite of moral emotions, maybe scaled down from what we have, but
Sure.
So it's there in our nature. We evolved it. We got it as part of the package of just being human. And then from there,
that was just a survival thing, right? Like
just
that's just
survival.
a Darwin, like you have to play nice with people, otherwise they're going to...
Exactly.
Okay.
So you start with something like Dawkins, selfish gene model, and what would a self-replicating molecule do to perpetuate itself into the future? It needs to build a cell to put itself in, and then multiple cells, and then an organism, survival machine to carry it forward. So our bodies are beholden to the genes. We are the gene survival machine. And so why shouldn't I just be as selfish and greedy as I possibly can, hoard all the resources, take all your stuff, and knock you on the head and take, well, because you would do the same calculation as me, and I know that you know that I might be thinking that, and I know that you know that I know that you might be thinking that. And so therefore, maybe it's better if I'm just nice to you. But I can't just fake and pretend I'm a nice person, because in time you will pick up the subtle cues that I'm not genuine in my feelings about you. I'm just coldly manipulating your emotions to get something. In time, people can see that in other people. So you can't just fake it. You have to actually believe it and actually feel like I want to be a good person.
Yeah.
And so you have that tension then, the good moral emotions and the dark side emotions, and they're there for all of us.
So isn't that strange, though, because that does show sort of, you're giving me the scientific explanation of why to be good, and then at the same time, that is sort of why religion would tell people to be good too, right? To better their community or to work with people or that kind of thing. So there is some place that you could use both of those things to come up with.
Well, I think what religions discovered this by trial and error over thousands of years. There are certain things that we shouldn't do because most people don't like it, So, killing and, this kind of thing. Even though there's a lot of bad stuff in the Bible, they kind of figured out, look, we're a community, so we need a set of rules. Mm-hmm. Maybe we disagree about the rules, but dang it, we need the rules, and everybody has to obey them. And if not, then there'll be punishments. And if you think you got away with it because there was no one around, there's an eye in the sky. This is in a way the basis of God beliefs. In part, there's multiple reasons for God, but that's one of them. There's a moral eye in the sky keeping track. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a psychopath and you don't care, well, all right, it's not going to work for you. But for the bulk of the population, that would work.
Yeah.
And so in a way, the conservative Christian belief in the sinful nature of humans is in a way a Darwinian model as well, because yes, we're greedy, and if we think we can get away with it, we might. So it's sort of like a prisoner's dilemma or a game theory type model, tit for tat, and okay, I'll start off cooperating, and if you cooperate, I'll cooperate again. But if you defect, then I'm gonna nail you for that.
Right.
So that desire to nail you, to get justice for the thing you did that was wrong, that's actually a good strategy. The Gandhian turn the other cheek, Jesus turn the other cheek, that's not a good game theory strategy, because that just means you'll be exploited by other people.
Right. It never works out well for that person, unfortunately.
No, and it doesn't, and it won't work for a whole society. Those kinds of societies won't survive, because other groups or clans or whatever will take them over. So it actually helps to cultivate a reputation of being a badass. You take my stuff, I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, Shermer, all right, well, okay, I respect you.
But you're coming to that point using a moral compass, right? I mean, you're saying I'm doing this sort of for myself, but that in itself is sort of for the greater good, right?
Well, but the greater good, it turns out to be a byproduct, but I think there's evolutionary arguments you can make that actually really is good for the group. Not a group selection argument, just that the more of us individuals that are cooperating within our group will be better off for that.
Yeah.
The group is not the target of selection; it's still the individuals.
Right.
But societies are better off, and so what I argue in the moral arc is that over the centuries, tweaking social, political, and economic systems this way and this way, we've been kind of hovering around this idea that there is a better way to live for more, in a utilitarian type argument. More of us will be better off and live longer and prosperous and healthy lives if we do this rather than that. A democracy versus a dictatorship, relatively free markets of trading and allowing people, to do their thing versus a command and control economy like in North Korea, or having a set of rules and a rule of law and a police force is good. Good fences make good neighbors.
Right.
So we've been doing these experiments. So that's what I mean. It's kind of like a science. It's like, okay, let's run the experiment and see how it goes. And then we'll tweak the variables in 4 years, called an election, and we'll try it again.
Right.
And there's no there to get there. There's no utopia. We're just trying to make a little bit of progress. So we'll increase taxes there and lower them there. Or we'll change the gun control laws here, but not there. And we'll see. Let's just see what happens.
Right. So you're saying when politicians promise they can fix everything, they're not actually telling you the truth.
Yeah, well,
I think that's what you're saying.
It's a shocker, I know.
Yeah. What do you make of people that would believe everything that you've said, that live their lives in a secular way, using science and reason and their own personal morality to guide their lives, but at the same time do take that leap of faith and still believe in some crazy stuff, still believe that maybe there's someone upstairs watching them? Because I think that's probably where most people fall, that they do live their lives based in secular ideas. But at the same time, if you really sat them down and said, well, because people want to believe at the end
Yes.
that they're going to go and, play tennis with God at the end of the day or something, right?
Will there be competition in heaven? This is what I want to know. Because if it's too boring,
Yeah.
there's nothing to do, if there's no challenges.
Yeah, then it wouldn't be worth it to you.
No, not to me.
Yeah. But what do you make of that
I
type of person?
It's a super good point, because in reality, most, say, conservative Christians today are more liberal socially than liberals were in the 50s, say. But they don't even know it. They're just like, well, I'm doing this because it says so in the Bible, and I'm a Christian, and Jesus, was like that. He said, Jesus should love all the gays and blacks, and so it's like, where does he say that, and where are you getting this?
Right.
Well, I know where they're getting it. They're getting it from culture that's been shifting for
Right.
decades. From the bottom up, just from everybody changing the way they talk and think about, and how shows are presented, how scripts are written, novels, books, and so forth. And all of us have changed expanded our moral sphere to be more encompassing. And so that the standouts like the Donald Sterlings of the world, who insults African Americans as the owner of the Clippers, boom, this his life is just ruined for this idiotic statements. But most old guys back in the 50s used to think like him. My dad was kind of like that, and it's like, Dad, you can't say that anymore.
Yeah, is that one of the scary things about societies changing too quickly? I mean, I know I follow you on Twitter, and you do push against some of this regressive left stuff and some of the social justice warrior stuff, because in a way, they're going to come for us too.
Yep,
things will keep
absolutely.
changing, and then some of the things that you're saying right now that don't sound controversial at all to me, depending on the way we evolve and depending on the way ideas, the way that they move throughout time, someone 20 years from now could look at this and say, you see, Shermer was a real bigot for some reason we can't even think of right now, right?
That's right, yeah. Of course, we worry about that or wonder about that. That we look back on, say, the debates about interracial marriage. It's like, what were they thinking?
Right.
And just this last year, looking back at gay marriage, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
We know what they're thinking because it's so recent. And so, but now, what are we thinking now that in 20 years people go, what we're here?
Yeah.
Like, look at that.
I think about that all the time. I'm tweeting out all this stuff all the time, and 20 years from now, is someone going to go, man, that guy was a complete lunatic? And they might be saying it now. That would be fun.
Well, we don't know because we're buried in the culture. It's just hard to say. I will say, just projecting forward, maybe the rights of the unborn, and here I don't mean fetuses, I mean future generations to inhabit an Earth that's habitable. That is, there's resources available and so on. So the the environmental movement, I think, is part of that. That would be one area. Artificial intelligence is maybe another one. Is data a person? Do they have personhood? Those kinds of things I think we can think about, although those are not particularly controversial. The social justice warriors, so-called and regressive left, it's an interesting term that's really caught on.
Yeah.
That was Majid.
Majid Nawaz, yeah.
Majid Nawad's, yeah. So I think it's very effective. That's an example of how far, first of all, how far we've come, how much moral progress we've made. That if the biggest thing on your plate as a college student is to protest Halloween costumes.
Right.
Really? That's it? That's
Yeah.
all, I mean, that means things are pretty dang good.
So is that the part that we need to focus on more then? Because I do think that, we all get in this big worked up frenzy over this stuff, and they sent out this letter and, they didn't want them to wear offensive Halloween costumes or something. Right. So to that, if you just look at it in that narrow view, it's like, oh shit, free speech is really being attacked. But if you look at it, and I think this is what you're saying, if you look at it from the broader spectrum, it's like, look what's left. Now we're just fighting over Halloween costumes. Yes. So in that sense, things really have progressed really well.
Exactly, right. You compare it to, say, what students were protesting in the 60s and 70s. And,
yeah.
And so, again, that's a sign of... But also, these moral pendulums tend to swing back and forth to one extreme to the other. And I think it has gone too far now. I mean, it seems like free speech as a moral principle is being trumped by other moral values that some people hold. The right to not hear something uncomfortable or offensive or something like that. I was arguing this back in the 90s with the Holocaust deniers when I wrote my book on, investigated them when they were kind of big. And Canada had anti-Holocaust denial laws. It was incorporated under their hate speech laws. Mm-hmm. I remember first reading about this going, hate speech? Why is that hate speech? I mean, if you're Jewish, I can see, but who's actually being harmed by this? These guys, you could just shine a light on them. You can see how wacky they are, and they'll go nowhere because they don't have anything. Mm-hmm. Why suppress them and lock them up? And then I remember when David Irving got arrested in Austria for, and he didn't even say anything. He was just going to give a lecture. And Hitchens defended him publicly, and I thought, that's good. In this case, free speech trumps that so-called hate speech, because the problem is who determines what's hateful.
Sure, and doesn't that, Hitch defending him, you debating these people and allowing for these terrible ideas, right? We all know the Holocaust happened. This is a terrible idea to deny it. But doesn't that show you that the secularists are pretty consistently on the right side of things, that we are the ones that are defending ideas?
Yes,
even when they are scary to us and things that we don't like?
Most of us.
Because most of us, right? Yeah, but people don't, if you do something that's against religion, generally religious people aren't going to defend you.
Right.
Where secularists they'll stand up for the idea.
Right. Some religions do defend free speech, and they're willing to allow their religion to be criticized. But for the most part, most of us, sort of circle the wagons and protect our group or whatever. And so it takes an extra effort. It's sort of that type 2 cognition. Wait a minute. Free speech is really important. So you have to sort of run through the arguments that John Stuart Mill made in his On Liberty, that, okay, what if they're right? Okay, they can't be right. Yeah, but what if they're right just like a little bit, then you'll learn something. And second, you can learn something from just the debate, just how confident are you in your arguments? Can you explain evolution by natural selection in 5 minutes in a debate? Because that's what you got to do.
Right.
Opening statement, rebuttal, Q&A, boom, boom, boom. Can you do it? And when you actually have to do it, like this in the case of debating the creationists, boy, I really sharpened my skills about how do I know evolution happened? What are the 4 best arguments we have? And it's actually kind of a good exercise in that sense. But mostly it's just let this guy talk. Mm-hmm. And the whole room can see how idiotic these arguments are. Just go for it, dude.
Right. Isn't that a little bit like when, who's that creationist that did the...
Ken Ham?
Yeah, when Ken Ham debated Bill Nye, right? Yes. And it was like, this was actually ridiculous. And all he had to do was just let him hang himself.
Yep.
But we're so afraid of doing that, aren't we? Like, we're so afraid of just letting someone go and...
It's counterintuitive. It doesn't feel like that's what we should do. We should circle the wagons and smack them down. But no, it's actually better if you don't. If you just provide better arguments and let the world see, how bad those arguments are. And yes, maybe he'll convince a few people, but in the long run, truth will win out. The bright light of reason will shine.
Right. I'm pretty sure he was just trying to sell tickets to the amusement park or whatever that thing is.
Maybe an attention and, some fundraising for his ARC park, which I see is going forward today. Oh boy, I don't know. I know Bill. Bill's a good friend, and, he had some doubts about whether he should do it or not. I think in the long run it was a good thing to do. He did a good job.
Because there's a fear of debating these people, because then you could end up debating every crackpot ever,
Yes,
right? Because there's always, and we see, this is something I see, you know, every now and again I'll see you argue with someone on Twitter or some of the other people that I admire arguing with somebody, and it's like, man, how much energy, and I'll do it sometimes too, how much energy should we put in to debating people either that have, you know, just ideas that are terrible or aren't debating from an honest place, or that you know are going to twist your words after. And there's a certain opportunity cost with that.
There is, and so one of the criteria I use is to what extent do people care about the subject? Is it influencing things? Is it being discussed in the political debates currently, or is it in the newspapers? So like in the Holocaust deniers back in the 90s, it was kind of a big thing. They were on Donahue. And Montel Williams, and they were, you know, there was articles written about them in Time and Newsweek and New York Times, and the Schindler's List came out, and there was big debates. They were challenging it, and there was articles about it. So I thought, you know what? It's time for us to engage that. What are they claiming? What exactly? So they actually gave me this list, 39 arguments that Holocaust historians cannot answer. I said, all right, give me the list.
Right.
So I actually went down and just worked my way through the list, and a lot of them were hard to find, actually. And a lot of his Holocaust historians that I consulted, they did not know the answers to these things, and now we know because, you know, I and others went out and tracked these things down.
Yeah.
And you know, Richard Evans did this in Irving's trial. David Irving sued Deborah Lipstadt for calling him a denier. Now here's an interesting sociological thing, because I've always called David Irving a Holocaust denier, but he likes me because we've gone out for beer and dinner before.
Really?
And I engage him and I talk to him. David, so what's going on with you? What are you working on now?
Right.
And so we have this thing. So he likes me. He doesn't like Lipstadt because she's, you know, nasty to him or didn't talk to him or wasn't. So one of the things I like to do as an investigator, I shouldn't call it an experiential journalist because
I like that. That sounds pretty
But maybe,
good.
you know, if Sean Penn could do it, maybe I could do it.
Yeah.
But just, you sort of get out there and you talk to people. And really, they do open up if you're nice and respectful to them, friendly. You know what? So just tell me about this. What is it you think is going on? Because I don't really understand the arguments, and they'll kind of open up. And then if you give them a few beers, they'll start talking about, you know, oh, the Jews. You know, the Jews are doing that. Oh, really? Okay, tell me more. Tell me more.
Right. So is that how you ended up sort of beating him in the public space, that you got to know the guy, you were able to sort of unravel some of the arguments? And I would guess that it's one of those things where you can just get, when you pull out one little pin, the rest of it starts to fall.
Exactly, right. I don't say a beat, but you know, you sort of lay it out there. Here's what he said, here's what he did, here's his arguments, and so on, and then just let the arguments speak for themselves, and I think they do.
Yeah.
And so those guys are largely gone now. And the creationists, you know, they're still hanging on. But the poll numbers are starting to shift. And the whole young earth creationism is largely being marginalized. You know, the Ben Carsons of the world, you know, Seventh-day Adventists, so they're young earth creationists. This is where all this silliness about the pyramids come from. It's because he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and it follows from these other beliefs that he holds about Genesis and all that. But you can see he's not going anywhere, and he's just one. And
Right.
more popular is either pretty mainstream or really not very religious centrist like Trump. You know, I think the power of the moral majority is past. I don't think to get elected you have to be an uber religious person anymore.
Yeah, you know, so Trump was just at Liberty University, and this is a guy who, by any estimation that I've ever seen, has no real religiosity to him. That's not even a word. You know, but he was up there, and he's
It's a good word, though.
he was yeah. There was definitely an extra S in there, but he's in there. He's at Liberty University, and he's quoting scripture wrongly. Apparently, he mucked up a couple things. But I was thinking, this is really what's wrong with our political system, really in the most perfect way, because here's a guy who, for whatever, all the reasons that people like him is because he's saying things very clearly, whether you know what I mean, whether it's true or not. He's just saying, and here, even he, who says I'm beholden to no one, has to pander still to the religious right. So we're not fully out of it yet.
Yeah,
right?
Not fully out of it, no, for sure. But yeah, you have to have a little bit of it. But that's not what's going to win the election. I think it's going to be the centrist votes this time, which is more secular, just more real world problems, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, so, but still there, it's another interesting, you know, it seems to be the Republicans, the right, are the ones identifying you know, the problem of terrorism, what's behind it. You know, there's certain religious beliefs that are behind it. Now, it's true, I know some of the ISIS fighters are young men out for money and sex and adventure and whatever, but underneath it is, you know, that sort of apocalyptic, otherworldly utopian society, this kind of really quasi-religious beliefs that are driving them. And it's the left that doesn't seem to want to acknowledge that. They're so afraid. It's this, again, political correctness run amok.
Yeah.
They're so afraid to use the word. Our own president won't use the word.
Yeah.
And he's a guy I admire. He's obviously very bright and thinks that he's a type 2 thinker all the way.
Right.
Maybe it'd be better if he sometimes used type 1.
Sure. At least in this instance, because then he would at least say the word. But yeah, this is coming out of the left. So I'm a liberal. What do I do about this? This has been the theme throughout the 4 or 5 months that we've been doing this show.
I understand. I've watched it, and I think you're doing exactly what what we have to do is push back, and you just push that pendulum back. And if enough of us do that, then it will get knocked back, and people will stop saying those. They'll start identifying things correctly, I think.
Yeah. Why do you think the left is so hung up on this one issue? So that if any time, I was just watching another program where after the Cologne sex attacks, right, 1,000 men, and there were rapes and all this terrible stuff, that immediately the argument became, well, Christians do bad stuff too. And, the West's done this, and we've bombed this or that. This sort of knee-jerk reaction to make everything, this moral equivalence, and sort of make everything about us. Had it been 1,000 Christians that had done this, they never would have flipped it the other way.
Exactly.
So what do we do? I mean, we just keep talking about it. I think.
Well, a couple things. First of all, why do they do that? Well, because, as Steven Pinker points out in The Blank Slate, the blank slate model that that culture determines everything and otherwise people are equal, that's more of a left wing than right wing view of human nature. Conservative Christians have more of a realistic, Steve calls a realistic model of human nature. That is, it's both genetics and culture, and second, that again, this all-inclusiveness. We don't want to offend other people because look what we were doing to blacks in the 50s and 60s and Jews in the 30s and 40s, and that was really bad. Okay, so that's sort of taking a principle and then running with it.
Right, no one's denying that. That's a fact.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it would be wrong to stereotype all Muslims. But it gets to the point where even if you say, if you preface every sentence with, of course, most Muslims are good and nice and moral people that would never do this, but then you can't even get past that. But what?
Yeah.
Now, my wife is from Cologne, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
She's German, and she just moved here last year and married me, and we live here now. But we were going to go to Cologne next month for Carnival, and now we're not going because she's worried about.
Really?
And her mother was just attacked about a week ago. So this is 2 weeks after the New Year's thing. And there's a lot of this going on that's not being reported because they're afraid to use the word to say, because her mom was attacked by an Arab-looking Syrian man who mumbled something about Western women and grabbed her breast and really offensive bottle of booze. It's a lot of these young men that are drunk and they're sort of using this as an excuse to what extent they're really religious. Who knows?
Sure, it's a confluence of a zillion things, but that's why we have to talk about it.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So is that where is that going right now?
Yeah. So where it's going? Well, now Angela Merkel, who I've admired very much, I think maybe she just went too far. That we have to do some screening. But the moment you say screening, then are you talking about targeting certain people? And isn't that stereotyping? And doesn't that lead to genocide? Okay, so you end up down that road. But
yeah.
Just take a little step, just a tiny bit to find out what's going on here before. That's why Trump made that comment, and he's called a bigot and a racist. But wait, he's just saying maybe we should just figure out what's going on here first.
Right, it gets twisted into something, and I'm not defending what he says at all, and that's also why language is so important to this, because we've gotten so afraid of saying anything the wrong way or writing anything the wrong way that you'll immediately be labeled a bigot and a racist and the rest of it, when all you're saying is we should have some decent screening to figure out who's here. And you're also giving me a first-hand example. I mean, your wife's mother was attacked.
Yes.
So this isn't made up stuff.
No, and this, it's cold. She's a 65-year-old woman all bundled up with umbrella and hat and jacket and everything. And so it's not like they're out groping young women in bars wearing miniskirts.
Right.
It's just grab anything that's female. And so who knows what the motivations are? Some of it again is just young men on on a rampage. But again, I think it's not just random who's doing it, and everybody's afraid to say what it is. And so Merkel, who I think has been a great leader, I think she's just gone too far.
Yeah, what do you make of the situation? I wasn't planning on going here, but I'm glad we're taking this road. That Germany, a lot of people are saying, and I've had a lot of people email me about this, that they're saying that the reason that they opened the borders the way they did was because there's this incredible guilt because of the Holocaust.
There's
And
some of
so
that.
they don't want to see people, if they can help, they want to help. But now it's gotten out of control, and now what this is going to do is help the far right. We're
Yes.
seeing hints of this here with Trump and xenophobia, and we're seeing this all over Europe now. So again, it's when the left doesn't deal with things honestly that we allow the right to rise.
Exactly right. I mean, if the left wants to defend their position, they should do the opposite of what they're doing, because it's the right that are going to sweep in. So my wife tells me that the sentiments in Germany about this, and before this, attitudes toward Israel and the Middle Eastern conflicts, is that we just have to bite our tongue because what we did was so bad that we just have to always support Israel. And even though there's numbers of people and branches in the society that do not support Israel, they can't say anything.
Right.
And even though there are debates about Palestinians and who's doing what and who's the real terrorist, and no one has perfectly clean hands in that conflict. But in Germany, you can't say this because of the guilt. There's a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
And they've had to, they've paid reparations to Israel for a long time. And, so Merkel's tried to navigate around. It's very difficult to do. And so in part, there's that, but also they're the strongest nation of the EU, and she was trying to set a precedence. And I see why she was trying to do that, but I just think it's probably gone too far. And now there's a lot, my wife tells me there's a lot of these strong right, Nazi type groups that are now bubbling up saying, see, I told you.
Yeah. Well, actually, next week I have Tommy Robinson on, who's the former head of the EDL, who Maajid Nawaz, who you mentioned earlier, at one point helped get him out of the EDL because he felt it was too far right and there were some neo-Nazi elements. And he had emailed me about coming on the show, and I had a real sort of debate within myself whether here's someone who I know a lot of people think he's just a racist, and then I get a lot of people that say, he's talking about things that people don't want to talk about. And I felt, well, if I talk to him, are people going to think I'm a racist? And then that was why I felt like I had to do the interview, and I have to do the interview because I can't be afraid of just the conversation and where that's going to place me. But that's where they've got us right now.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Well, but they're not. They don't have us there.
Yeah.
We are talking about it, and we will do that, and we will push back, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in Germany and Europe, they've made a major transition from 500 years of very tribal and balkanized, constant in conflict history to a completely different kind of society. And so when these tensions have been bubbling up, the temptation is to go back, but then to put no, we don't want to do that because look what happened. This led to all these conflicts and genocides and so on. But part of the problem is recognizing that there really are bad people in the world. They really do mean harm. They really do behead people, and they do bad things. For whatever reason, they're not all psychopaths. A lot of them are just morally motivated. As I mentioned, 90% of homicides are moralistic in nature. But this is true for genocides and ethnic cleansings and pogroms. They're morally motivated. They have wrong ideas.
But could ideas that dangerous ever have gestated without religion? Because almost all, if you think, Holocaust, pogroms, what's happening right now in Europe, all of these things, there's a religious underpinning to all of them. So could this type of mass stuff ever happen without religion?
Well, it did in the 70s and 60s, 70s, 80s with Marxist regimes and terrorists. I mean, there was a lot of terrorism in the 70s. I mean, way more than now. CNN just ran that. They had those series, the 70s, the 80s, and so on. And the one in the 70s, one of the episodes was just an hour long of all the terrorist attacks. I forgot, I lived through it, but I forgot how many there were.
Yeah.
And, to the point where Monty Python parodied it in The Life of Brian.
Yeah.
The People's Judea front, the front of People's... We're the People's Front of Judea! Ah, those idiots over there!
Right.
That's how many there were back then. And there was the rates of murders were much higher and bombings in the United States. But those were moralistically driven, But it's a kind of because Marxism is sort of a quasi-religious. So what's behind when we say religion? It's this idea of a utopian society. There's a place we can get to, either heaven above or heavens on earth. We can get there. if it weren't for those people that are stopping us, the capitalists, the imperialists, or the Jews or the Christians or the whoever it is, so it's engaging the moral module in the brain, whatever that is, to be worked up about a cause.
Right. So I love that concept that you're always fighting the other, whoever the other is, and it can be through the religious prism or the secular prism, and it's sort of up to us to figure out which one we're going to
Exactly. And I'm worried about the EU and Germany because they've been moving in the right direction of very porous borders. You can travel across all the countries. There's no border checks. And it's just like driving across the United States now. It's great, and they've become much more economically prosperous because of that, and politically more freedom and more democracies. All those things are good, but now there's this. I'm fearful there'll be a backlash. Close those borders. Balkanize.
We see it's
Europe.
happening right now, right?
And then if they abandon the currency, the euro as a currency, that's going to be bad economically.